Welcome to our GCSE revision tasks on algorithms, brought to you by the computing team at Ada National College for Digital Skills. We will go over some of the questions from the OCR paper from 2023, reflecting on questions to do with robust programming, data validation, integrated development environments, and developing programming solutions. In this paper, you are given a scenario. Scenario-based questions are quite common, and in many papers you will see lots of follow-up questions based on the same scenario that test a range of skills and knowledge from different topics. You should anticipate some sort of coding questions to follow on from this. This particular question is checking your understanding for why testing is so important before a program or a product is completed for real. For this question, you need to explain why programs should be tested. There are a number of responses you could give here. The obvious one being checking for errors and then being able to fix them. But also note you could build a brilliant program, but the end product may be off the mark, therefore not meeting the requirements. So you should therefore test the whole program to ensure it meets your end user requirements. You could also build something that does work but doesn't give the right results or outputs, therefore results in logical errors. You would also want to test your program for ease of use and identify if any improvements are needed or any further developments. You might want to purposely test the program to its limits to ensure it is not prone to destruction. Although it's a 2-marker question, there are multiple answers that you could give. Ensure that you read the question carefully to give the most appropriate answer. Have a look at this question. This is about your understanding on the different forms of testing that can be undertaken either during development or completion of a program. Again, this is a 2-marker question, so you're really asked to give one type of test and then explain how this would be carried out. There are multiple answers that can be given here. Firstly, you would want to check that the normal data can be accepted by the program. It would check that the response with the data that's been inputted should be accepted. You may want to check if invalid data is rejected by placing some erroneous data in. You could also perform some extreme testing by checking the response of your program with data that's on the edge of acceptance, for example, the highest or the lowest values. You could also carry out 2 other types of testing. One done during the development phase, so as you're producing or developing a unit of your program, you can carry out tests as you run that. Or you can carry out terminal testing, which is done at the end of development. This tests your program as a whole. The next question is about maintainability of your program. Here, you'll be tested for your understanding of all the different types of features of an integrated development environment that supports the maintainability of your program. Have a look at this question. It's a 4-marker question. You are asked to give 2 features and then give a description of how these features support the maintainability when you are testing your program. There are a range of answers you could give for this question. I'll talk through each one briefly. Note that if you are developing programs in Python, for example, they are written in high-level language. Now, in order for these to be processed, they need to be converted into low-level or machine code so the program can be executed effectively. For this, you would need an inbuilt feature such as a translator or an interpreter. Another feature that's useful is the runtime environment, which shows the program or the code as you are executing the program. Another enhanced feature is error diagnostics. This shows the type of error and the location, i.e. the line number of an error, and it sometimes makes suggestions on how to fix that error, for example if it's a syntax error or if an input's required. There are other tools such as a debugger, breakpoints, color coding, and keyword completion, which are also very beneficial and are built into a number of IDEs to support the maintainability of your code. This question is quite a meaty question and tests your understanding of validation methods. Remember, validation methods are used to ensure the accuracy of your program. There are a range of methods that I will talk through, but remember, to get the full marks in questions like this, you must link it back to the scenario that you've been given at the start of the question set. Here are a range of answers that you could give for this question. Note how I have broken this down into the validation technique for your first mark, how it works for your second mark, and for the third mark, you are linking it back to the context. So for example, you could do a range check to check that the data you've input is within the upper and lower boundary. Note, to link it back to the context, the player needs to enter a number between 1 and 10. You can perform a type check to ensure that the data is of an appropriate type. So for example, in this game you must enter a whole number, so you need to check that the input is a valid integer. You might also perform a format check to ensure that the data follows the correct pattern. The input or the answer is only going to be 1 or 2 digits, as you have to enter a number between 1 and 10. Any of these responses shown here would be valid. The question that now follows is based on the scenario but requires you to develop a solution. Examiners are testing your understanding of how to problem solve here. Most questions like this are broken down into bullet points. The easiest way of tackling this is to look at each bullet point and try to solve it in logical order. Note, in this particular question, you are asked 3 addition questions. So if you are doing something 3 times over and over, you are most likely to need a loop. They've already given you the number of times you are going to loop, in which case you would use a for loop. You are then told what the inputs are going to be. Based on this, you need to decide 2 sensible variable names for your inputs. You're also tested on how to implement a condition. So if the player gets a correct answer, their score is incremented by 1. At the end of the game, you also need to display an output. Here is a suggested solution. I'll walk through this line by line to explain what each line does. So at the start of your solution, you would need a variable called score, and you'd initialize this to 0 to begin with. The score variable keeps a track of the number of correct answers the user has guessed. The score would increment by 1 each time it loops. The next line implements a for loop. So we've initialized a variable called count, which will loop from 1 to 3, as we know 3 questions will be asked. Next, we will include 2 variables. I've included num1 and num2, which have taken input between the values of 1 and 10. You can see that I have addressed this by importing the random function, and then in the brackets we've assigned the values, which are the lowest and the maximum limit between 1 and 10. The next line is used to calculate the answer, but also to take in the user's input. Note that concatenation is used to combine multiple pieces of text into one single string that will be displayed to the user. Why is concatenation needed here? Well, num1 and num2 are variables, they're not literal strings, so we need to combine them with other strings to form a readable question. The next line is our conditional statement, and what it does is it checks the user's input equals to the actual answer of num1 plus num2. If the answer is correct, then our score, which was initialized at 0, will increment by 1. The penultimate line moves to the next question. Note that we have put a for loop here. The loop ends when the count equals to 3. Having now addressed all the bullet points, we finally end the solution with an output, and at the end of the game the score is then displayed. This is populated by the score variable. Here is the solution to the same problem, but using a high-level language in Python. Note that we have imported the random function at the start to enforce random number generation. In the same way, we've created a for loop. This counts from 1 to 3 since Python ranges stop before the last number. We've created two variables in a similar fashion and again directed it to pick a number between 1 and 10. This is a whole number, so we've included a random int.